I loved watching the color television shows. Superman was one of the first ones in color. My parents bought a color TV. Zorro was the other one in color. Everything else on television was black and white. Those two companies shot in color, but when the show originally aired on television, it was black and white. They didn't make color prints because it costed more money, and television at that time was black and white. So when I moved home, I was able to watch a lot more TV. My grandmother didn't have a TV when I lived with her. And what happened, it blew me away how all of a sudden everything was in color. Oh, God. And when they put the reruns of Superman and Zorro on television, that's when they were in color. It blew me away. At any rate, I had started collecting comics again, and then Star Trek came on, and I bought all the Star Trek comics. I went to the Star Trek convention in 1983, and the Star Trek convention was held at the Penta Hotel in New York City. I went to it as a dealer. I brought a lot of my Star Trek stuff so I could get rid of my doubles. And I took a table. And when I went there, I had been reading the Star Trek comics, but I also had been reading a lot of science fiction books. And I was reading one sci-fi book, and when you turned it over, it was a paperback. When you turned it over, it had a picture of the author on the back of the cover of the book. And the author was a man who you could not mistake because he had these huge sideburns sticking out on each side of his face. And here I am. I set up at the Star Trek convention before it opened. I had my tables and all my stuff set up. And I'm standing in one of the aisles, and walking down the aisle comes a man with huge sideburns sticking out of each side of his face. And I went right up to him. The show was going to start in about another 15 minutes. I went right up to the guy, and I said, "Excuse me, Mr. Asimov." I said, "I'm writing a short story, a science fiction story." I said, "I wonder if you could answer some questions for me." And Isaac Asimov looked at me, and he said, "And your name is Stanley?" And he says, "Okay." And he was carrying a valise, and he puts it down on a counter, on a desk, and he says to me, "What do you want to know?" And I said, "Well, you're a writer." And I said, "I'm reading one of your books." And he said to me, "Only one of them?" And I said, "Well, I have a couple of others." He says, "I've written a lot of books." I said, "I understand you're one of the most prolific writers in the world." And he just smiled. And he said, "Well, I don't know about that." He said, "But I know I've written hundreds of books." And we started talking. I basically asked him, I said, "I'm writing a short story. I'm having a lot of problems." "What kind of problems?" "I keep moving things around. I write a paragraph, and then I move it to the beginning, then I move it to the middle, then I go back and I rewrite." And, he said to me, "Stop." He hit the two keys on his attaché case, and it sprung open. And inside the attaché case was a small Smith Corona portable typewriter. And he said to me, "I got on the train this morning in Boston at 5:45, and," he said, "it took a little over 3 hours to get here to New York. But while I was on the train, I typed out a short story. And I asked him, I said, well, how long should a short story be? And he pulls out on the top part of the case, he pulls out all the white pages with his story typed on it, and it had all the carbon copies and then all the copies. Everything was in perfect order. And he said, my short story is exactly 29 pages long because that's how long it took me to write it. And he said, and if you look, you'll see everything is double spaced. He says, now, he said, are you typing your short story? No, I'm writing it by hand. I don't know how to type. You should learn how to type. At any rate, I asked him, I said, so my story should be 29 pages. He said, no. He said, it should be exactly as long as it takes to tell your story. He says, it sounds to me, though, like you have a problem writing. And I said, yes, I do. I was never good at writing. And he said, I'll tell you how I work. And he pointed to his head. He said, I put my short story up here. And he said, once I have it all figured out, once I know how it starts, what happens during the entire story, and how it ends, he says, and then, he said, I decide on names for the different people in the story and I figure out what they will do. And he says, once I have it all in my head, then when I get on the train, I can start typing at the beginning, and I keep typing through the whole story, the middle of it, and when I get to the end, I already know how it's going to end. He says, so I finish it. And it blew me away that it was that simple in order to learn how to write. I couldn't believe it. Nobody had ever told me anything like that. We talked for a while. I know part of my story was about going to the moon. And I believed every single thing Isaac Asimov taught me during the 20 minutes or so that we talked. But I never believed him when he told me, by the way, the moon is hollow. I couldn't believe that. I said, how could it be hollow? And he said to me, if it were solid, it would crash into the earth. It's much too big to be a moon. It's the size of a planet. And this blew me away. He said to me, and I will never forget this, the moon was constructed somewhere else, and it was towed to the earth. It was put in perfect circular orbit. But whoever put it in orbit did not want it to spin. So they set it up so that one side of the moon could be seen from the earth and the other side could never be seen. He said, no other planet in our solar system has a moon like this. And I'll never forget that. And I remembered that up until about a year ago when NASA learned that there are two moons around Mars, and NASA confirmed one of them is hollow. That sort of blew me away. At any rate, as I mentioned, I never believed Isaac Asimov, but what he told me was totally incredible. I couldn't believe it. When I found that there was a moon around Mars that was hollow, I went to Google and I did a little research. And I found out that Isaac Asimov wasn't the person who discovered that the moon was hollow. It was discovered by two Russian scientists, and they wrote a paper about it in Russia, and they proclaimed that the moon had to be hollow. It would have crashed into the earth otherwise because of the density and the gravitational pull. And it blew me away. But it turned out that this is incredible how coincidences happen. It turned out that Isaac Asimov was born in Russia, and he came to the United States. He could read Russian, and that's how he learned that the moon was hollow. And the papers were written in, I think, 1978 or 79, when he came to the convention in 1983. He knew that the moon was hollow. He told me he was going to take his short story to his editor after he met some of the Star Trek people. And he also told me, when I asked, I said, when they take your short story, does your editor change anything? And he looked at me. He said, if the editor changed one word of my story, I would never work for him again. He said, my story is perfect. I said, do you ever misspell any words? He said, why would I ever do that? And what happened is, and this is the incredible thing, the call I just got was from a man named John Shalit. John Shalit is my writing partner. He's been my writing partner for 5 years. We wrote a couple of screenplays together, and the last one was written 2 years ago, and the last screenplay we wrote is called Golden Blood. Golden Blood is a thriller. If you look it up on Google, you will learn that there are only 50 or 60 people in the world who have what is called golden blood. And basically, when John wrote the story, he had to research the SARS virus, and he also researched the MERS virus. And then he was able to predict that we would have a third virus. And he made the prediction 2 years ago that it would be much worse than the first two. And he had studied them so much, he knew so much, and I never realized what a great researcher he was. But I talked with him about research, and, we've been, for the past 5 years, we've had a couple of phone calls every week conferring about what we're doing together. And he told me that he writes his stories. He plans them in his head from beginning to end. He thinks about all the characters. He names them. And I mentioned to him, that's incredible. I said, the only other person, I said, I've had a lot of English teachers, and I've met a lot of writers. The only other person who told me what you just told me is Isaac Asimov. And John looked at me and laughed. He said, well, he's Russian. And I said, what are you? He says, I'm Bilo-Russian. And he said, we couldn't be related. It's impossible. And he said, don't even think of it. And I asked him, I said, where are your parents from? He gave me the name of the town. I went home. I had been calling him. No, I was at home. I'm sorry. I went to my computer, is what I want to say, after the phone conversation. And I looked up Isaac Asimov, and I found where he was born. And the incredible thing, I couldn't believe this. I looked up a map of Russia, and I found the town where he was born, and it's right next to the Bilo-Russian border. And Johnstown is on the other town of the border, on the other side of the border. They were about, I think, 14 miles apart. So it's possible they could be related. But what amazed me is that they're both intellectuals. They both are very good writers. They're both, they were both born in a similar area. And even though John is from Bilo-Russia, his parents spoke Russian, and he speaks Russian, exactly like Isaac Asimov.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the Force be with you. Nanu Nanu.